Welcome to Life Stories, where one dinner toast shattered a marriage, and a single breath could mean the difference between goodbye and a second chance. What would you do if the person you loved most walked away the moment you needed them to stay? And what if the only hand reaching out to save you came from a complete stranger with a secret that could change everything? This isn't just a story about illness. It's about the quiet collapse of a life built on appearances and the slow, painful rise of a woman discovering what love truly means. Stay with us, because what starts with a fall ends in a garden where something rare finally dares to bloom. Let's begin. Clink of crystal glasses echoed softly against the low hum of conversations, blending with the muted jazz floating through the dimly lit bistro in Brooklyn. Candlelight flickered across the white linen tablecloths, casting warm shadows on Ava Campbell's face as she smiled at her husband. "To 5 years with the most beautiful woman in the world," Brandon said, his voice smooth, his smile picture perfect. He raised his glass with practiced charm, the kind that once swept Ava off her feet. She lifted hers to meet his, their eyes locking for a moment too long. It was a gaze laced with something unspoken, pride maybe, or wariness, or fear. But then, before glass touched glass, her fingers trembled. The flute slipped from her hand, shattering as it hit the tiled floor. Gasps rippled through the room. Ava didn't flinch. She collapsed. Across the restaurant, Dr. Russ Ethan Moore pushed his untouched glass of wine aside as chairs scraped the floor and panic broke like a wave. He was on his feet before he knew why. Years of medical training kicked in before emotion could catch up. "I'm a doctor," he announced, already pushing through the gathering crowd. The woman's skin had turned an alarming yellow, her breathing shallow and erratic. Her name, he would learn moments later, was Ava Campbell. And though he didn't know her, not yet, the sound of her name sent a jolt through him. A strange pull he couldn't explain. He'd seen this before, in med school, in his mother's hospice room, in the mirror sometimes, late at night. "Has she been ill?" he asked her husband, now pale and frozen beside her. "Nothing serious," Brandon stammered. "Just tired, stomach aches, stress from work, we thought." Ethan touched 2 fingers to Ava's pulse. Rapid, weak, sirens wailed in the distance, time blurred. What he couldn't know, not then, was that this wasn't just a case that would land in his rounds. It was personal, deeply, unforgivingly, and that the woman whose life he was now trying to save was connected to his own in a way that would unravel everything he believed about fate, duty, and love. At Hudson View Medical Center, fluorescent lights flickered above Brandon's head as he sat alone in the ER waiting room, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles were white. When Dr. Moore appeared, his white coat stained at the cuffs from Ava's collapsed vein, his face was unreadable. "She's stable," he said, "but I need to speak with you in private." The walls of the consultation room were painted in calming blues, but nothing about this moment was calm. Ethan laid the test results flat on the desk. He didn't circle the mass with a pen. He didn't tap the charts dramatically like in the movies. Instead, he looked Brandon dead in the eyes. "We found masses on her pancreas. Her liver function is severely compromised. We need to perform a biopsy, but all signs point to late-stage pancreatic cancer." Brandon blinked, the words not landing all at once. "She's 34, he said, as if that fact alone would change the diagnosis. "I know," Ethan replied. "But cancer doesn't care." The words were too clinical, too final. Brandon wanted to argue, wanted to scream, but all he could do was nod as Ethan continued. "The average survival rate in advanced cases like hers is between 5 and 10%. Silence. Then, Jesus. 3 hours later, Ava opened her eyes to the rhythmic beeping of machines and the cold burn of IV fluid coursing through her arm. Her first question wasn't about the cancer. It wasn't even about whether she was going to die. It was, "Where's Brandon?" Ethan was the one who answered. Brandon had stepped out to call work, or so he claimed. But Ethan saw the signs. The way Brandon looked at her, not with fear, but with resentment, as if she had ruined his evening. As Ethan explained the diagnosis, Ava didn't cry, didn't scream. She asked for the truth, raw, unpolished. He gave it to her, everything he knew, everything he feared. And when she looked at him, something shifted. "You said your name is Moore?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Yes, Ethan Moore." Her brow furrowed. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. "I think I designed your mother's garden." He froze. "My mother?" he asked, the breath catching in his throat. "Margaret Moore. She had a small cottage in Montclair with a Japanese maple by the window and wind chimes above the bench facing the east wall. She asked for a space to die in peace." Ethan didn't answer. Couldn't, because it was true, because Ava Campbell, this woman dying in front of him, had given his mother the only peace she'd known in her final months. And now fate had delivered her back to him. Dying, alone. And he suddenly knew, without any doubt, that he wouldn't let her walk that path alone. What would you do if the person who once gave your loved one peace now needed you to save her life? Could you separate duty from something far more personal, something that could break you both? Continue reading to uncover the truths Ethan never expected and the decision Ava must make when she finds herself abandoned, not just by her body, but by the man she thought would never leave. Ava didn't sleep that night. The hum of hospital machines, the smell of antiseptic, the dim light flickering through the blinds, it all bled together into something unreal. She watched the shadows on the wall shift slowly, like time dragging its feet. Her body ached in places she never noticed before, but it wasn't the pain that kept her awake. It was absence. Brandon hadn't come back. He'd kissed her forehead before stepping out just for a moment, but hours had passed. Now the silence felt like an answer, a quiet, definitive one. Dr. Moore, Ethan had checked on her twice, each time calm, composed, professional, but underneath that polished exterior there was something else. Something heavy behind his eyes. She saw it clearly the third time he came in. "Still no word from your husband?" he asked gently, not unkindly. Ava didn't respond. She just shook her head. Ethan hesitated before stepping further into the room. "I know it's none of my business," he began, "but you shouldn't be alone right now." "Funny," Ava said, voice brittle. "I've never felt more surrounded. By tubes, beeping machines, people with charts, and yet completely alone." Ethan nodded, sitting in the chair beside her bed. His movements were measured, his presence steady. "Can I ask you something personal?" Ava asked, surprising even herself. He nodded. "Your mother, did she die here, in this hospital?" He paused. "No, she chose to die at home, in the garden you created for her." Ava exhaled, the memory hitting her with unexpected clarity. "She wanted wind chimes that sounded like bells," she murmured. "Said she didn't want silence to be the last thing she heard." Ethan's smile was small, almost reverent. She said those chimes reminded her of her childhood church. They sat in silence for a long beat, the connection between them no longer strange but sacred. Then Ava spoke again. "Do you ever think we're being prepared for things before we even know it?" Ethan tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "I designed that garden for a dying woman not knowing I'd need the same kind of peace someday. Like life knew. Before I did." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "Sometimes I wonder if the people we save are saving us too." The door creaked open. A nurse stepped in with a phone. "Miss Campbell, there's a call for you." Ava took the phone, pulse already quickening. She knew who it was before she said hello. "Ava," Brandon's voice came, strained but steady. "I'm at the airport." She closed her eyes. "I couldn't handle it," he continued. "I know that sounds weak. Hell, maybe it is. But watching you in that bed, hearing the word cancer like it's some kind of sentence, I panicked." "You left," Ava said flatly. "You didn't panic. You left." "I'm coming back," he said. I needed time." Ava stared at the pale ceiling tiles, trying to find her breath. "Please," Brandon said. "Let's talk when I get there." She ended the call without answering, not out of cruelty, but because she genuinely didn't know what she would say. Ethan stood beside her, watching carefully. She didn't look at him. "I think he's coming back," she said. He didn't respond. "I thought that would bring relief, but it feels like dread." Now she looked at him, and in her eyes was something deeper than pain. Confusion, betrayal, guilt. I built my life around this man, around the idea of us, and now all I feel is wrong. Everything feels wrong. It's okay not to know what you feel, Ethan said. She studied his face for a long moment. But you do know, don't you? What you feel. He didn't look away. Yes, he said simply. I do. The air between them tightened, thick with everything that couldn't be said aloud. Then Ava whispered, if I survive this, I don't know if I want my old life back. There it was, the twist she hadn't seen coming. The realization that shook her more than the diagnosis. She wasn't just afraid of dying. She was afraid of returning to the person she used to be. The woman who said yes when she wanted to say no. The wife who smiled through discomfort. The designer who built spaces for peace while ignoring the war inside herself. That life was gone. And maybe it was time to stop trying to salvage what no longer fit. Have you ever faced a moment so life-altering that it made you question everything you thought you wanted? As Brandon returns and the past knocks at her door, Ava must choose, rebuild the life she had, or embrace the one she never imagined. Don't miss what comes next. Brandon arrived the next morning, wheeling a sleek silver suitcase behind him, sunglasses still on, though the sun hadn't made it past the morning fog. He walked through the hospital like a man entering a negotiation, not a reunion. Ava waited in the hospital courtyard, wrapped in a thick gray shawl, seated beneath a dogwood tree just beginning to bud. Her face, though paler, carried a quiet determination. She had insisted on meeting him here, in the open, not inside her room where she felt most vulnerable. Ethan stood nearby, far enough to give her space, close enough to step in if she needed an exit. Brandon took a seat across from her, his tailored coat brushing the edge of the wrought iron chair. He said nothing for a moment, studying her, maybe searching for the version of her that used to laugh at his jokes and host dinner parties in their Beacon Hill home. But that woman wasn't here anymore. I'm sorry, he said at last. For what exactly? Ava asked, her voice calm, not bitter, just precise. For leaving, for not knowing how to face it. You, the cancer, everything. Ava nodded slowly. You left me a note, Brandon. 7 words. He looked down, ashamed or trying to appear as such. I didn't know what else to say. You could have said you were scared, she said. You could have said you didn't know how to help, but you said nothing. You emptied our accounts and vanished. I panicked, he repeated. No, she replied, her voice quiet but sharp. You planned. Brandon opened his mouth, closed it again. Then, I came back because I realized what I lost. What we had. What we had, Ava interrupted, was something I kept alive while you watched it wilt. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. How I watered our marriage like one of my gardens, even when the soil had already gone dry. Brandon flinched. I made mistakes. Ava folded her hands in her lap. And I forgave them, over and over, until I ran out of space inside me to keep shrinking. Silence settled between them, heavier than the early spring chill. I still love you, he said. No, you don't, she replied gently. You miss the woman who made your life easier, who covered for your absences and smiled through your silences, but that woman doesn't live here anymore. He sat back, defeated. Is there someone else? She didn't answer right away. There's someone who stayed, she said, who didn't run, who stood beside me when I couldn't stand on my own. But this isn't about him. This is about me choosing what kind of life I want, if I'm lucky enough to keep having one. Brandon looked like he might protest, but instead he stood. I guess this is goodbye. I think it's the first honest thing we've ever said to each other, she replied. He left the way he came, silent, smooth, and polished. But his shadow didn't linger. Later that evening, Ethan found her back in the garden, where the golden hour turned every leaf into stained glass. Was it what you needed? He asked. She nodded. Closure. Not the kind I expected, but the kind I could live with. He sat beside her, the hush of the garden wrapping around them. I've been thinking, she said, about what you said before, about being prepared for things without realizing it. Ethan waited. That garden I built for your mother, it was the first time I felt like my work meant something real, not just pretty landscapes for wealthy clients, but something that gave someone peace, It stayed with me. She called you her angel, Ethan said you gave her something no medicine could. I never forgot her, Ava whispered. They sat in silence again until she turned to him. I want to build something. For this hospital. For people like me. A healing garden. A space where no one has to feel like death is the only thing growing. Ethan's breath caught. You're serious? I'm alive, she said. For now. And that's enough reason. Weeks passed. Then months. The scans improved. The tumor shrank. Not gone, but smaller. The clinical trial worked better than expected. Ava began drawing again. Her hair started to grow back in soft, uneven waves. She smiled more, laughed again, sometimes mid-sentence, catching herself by surprise. The hospital approved the garden. Ethan's father, head of the Reed Foundation, matched the funding. And Ava, for the first time in over a year, felt rooted. Not to a person, not to a prognosis, but to a purpose. She and Ethan never labeled what was growing between them. There were no dramatic confessions, just shared cups of tea, exchanged glances that said more than words could, and a steady presence that felt like home. On the day they planted the first Franklin tree, the same rare species she once chose for Ethan's mother's garden, Ava pressed her palm to the earth beside it. You said your mom believed in signs? She said, smiling up at him. She did, he replied. What do you think this one means? He looked at the small tree, its leaves still fragile but stubborn, its roots newly claimed in unfamiliar soil. I think it means, he said slowly, that sometimes what's meant to bloom doesn't come in the season we expect, but when it does, it's worth the wait. That night, Ava wrote in her journal, I'm not cured, but I'm healing. Not just in body, but in who I am. I may never go back to the life I had, and I don't want to. Because somewhere between collapse and survival, I found something better than certainty. I found peace. And in a quiet garden, surrounded by life and the man whose mother once called me an angel, I found home. How did this story make you feel? Did it resonate with your own life or someone you love? If you love this journey, drop 100 in the comments. Where are you watching from? Share this video with someone who needs hope, healing, or just a reminder that even broken things can bloom again. Thank you for spending time with Life Stories.